And we're live. Hello, hello. Welcome to the fine print. We've been off a couple of weeks because life happens. I'm Allison, the Mighty Librarian.
And I'm Vagabondia, the equally
Other
mighty
might,
librarian. Is that better?
probably mightier, I would argue. But hey, it's been a couple of weeks since we were last on. Yeah,
Some
there's some
shit went
shit going
down.
on. Yeah, and we're going to talk about it. We'll talk about some of the other issues related maybe a little bit more to education and libraries, but all of this we could see a mile away in probably 2 years ago when Trump announced his candidacy, but he has federalized California's National Guard. I want to make it clear, though, this is not martial law. And I think that's really important that if you are hearing people say it's martial law, you correct them because here's my big worry, which I think is probably a lot of people's worry, is that martial law, if people keep hearing we're under martial law, they think it's not a big deal. Because life everywhere else outside of LA is going to continue on like normal. And if we normalize martial law, we don't fear it anymore. So we're not under martial law. Now, I don't know all the legal, what you call it, intricacies of it. Last time martial law was declared, I think, was Hurricane Katrina, when like the looting really got bad. And martial law, let's roll back before we even talk about martial law. Federalizing the National Guard isn't done for a couple of reasons. It violates states' autonomy, but it also instills public distrust. So why do you federalize the National Guard? Well, think about times in our past that the National Guard was federalized. The LA riots in after the Rodney King verdict, Katrina, when when the schools were desegregated, the Alabama governor famously said, "Nope, segregation forever," and that whole stupid line. And so JFK said, yoink, and pulled away his National Guard, who the governor said that he was going to use to block any African Americans from entering whites only schools. So the National Guard is federalized when public safety is at risk. And Gavin Newsom, and I should have had this pulled up, but I didn't. Gavin Newsom put out a couple of statements, and he shows his words very, very specifically. It may not appear it, but they're very carefully chosen, and that's because he wants to show that there is order and maintained, and the public is not endangered. And at the point that Trump writes this executive order, I obviously don't live in LA or anywhere near these areas that had, the rowdier protests, but they had dispersed from people who actually lived there or who went to the scene to record it. And so we have to really look at the legality of the president, any president using martial law. I'm sorry, there I go, nationalizing the federal guard and when it's been used and if it's appropriate in this situation. So, Vagabondia, what are you thinking about all of this?
We're going to have to be really careful as consumers of news to watch what's being reported and check it because a lot of the information being put out, even by very reputable sources, is that the National Guard was deployed yesterday, which no, they arrived this morning, and that there's been some misinformation on who's done what and under what authority and so forth. And so we're going to have to it's gonna be one of those we won't know for weeks all of the real information. But you're absolutely right. Like being very careful about what's being done by who, under what under what authority, and then particularly the martial law aspect of who can announce that and has it been announced and that kind of thing. So we're going to be wading through some serious misinformation for a while.
And a lot of it done on purpose. Because
Oh,
people
absolutely.
hear martial law, and this is a concern of mine. There's people who know what it is, there are people who know kind of what it means, and then there's people who don't know what it means, and then even worse, people who don't actually know what it means, but want to thinks it means one thing, and they want to amplify that meaning so that it stows more unrest. So it's really really uh, really important that we like really understand it. I while you were talking, I was just combing through the Wikipedia article because I'm not one of those mighty librarians who wags their finger at Wikipedia. It has come a long way in who they allow to write articles. It's usually sourced pretty well. You have to use a little bit of common sense when reading it, but it's usually sourced fairly well because you don't, people like average Joe Americans like us, we don't need the whole technical, uh, we just need to know exactly what it is. And they have a pretty good definition of it and show examples of when martial law has been used in the country. It has only been used not a handful of times, a lot of them in the very distant past, because it essentially removes habeas corpus. And we've heard that term, and I think it literally means in Latin, produce a body. But it basically says if you're going to arrest somebody, you have to A, have a warrant, you have to have evidence, you have to follow the legal procedure of the law. You can't just throw somebody in jail because you feel like it or you don't like what they're saying or you feel they're a danger, but they're not actually a danger. It's basically what holds the rule of law together is habeas corpus. And essentially where due process, the idea of due process comes in. Now, and habeas also refers to you must be tried in the location of your crime, in the let me rephrase, the jurisdiction of your crime. So that means if you commit a state crime in Georgia, you are tried within the locality of where in Georgia you were had are accused of committing a crime. So that uh, Abrego Garcia, I think I forgot a part of his name, but he a lot of people were arguing he had no due process, which he didn't. He was arrested and immediately jailed, not read any rights, not read any of what he was being charged with. He was just deported immediately to El Salvador, and we all know the rest of the story. So where does habeas come into that? Habeas means that A, they had to have a warrant by a judge to arrest him. They had to have a judge grant his deportation. He had to have been read the charges, what his rights were, because even immigrants, tourists from other countries, they all have constitutional rights. It's already been decided. This isn't a new thing. There's tons of Supreme Court cases. If you are in the jurisdiction of the United States Constitution, that Constitution applies to you. That I don't know why people don't read their constitutions more often, which I'll show you where you can get your own in a little bit. But here's the thing. With habeas, you cannot be charged with a crime and then deported to another state. You have to be held within that state. So that's another part of habeas that they broke in his case. Let me just reiterate, I am not an attorney. I am just a dork who really likes the law, and you can find any of this information from attorneys who are on YouTube who explain all of this in detail, and I watched way too many videos, but I also want to put out there that this is not legal advice. This is not, I'm just explaining the layman's version of what habeas is. Um, and that's why it's so dangerous if we go into martial law, because martial law takes that away. Now, martial law is declared, if President Trump declares martial law, that's martial law for the whole country. The governor can declare martial law for its own state. Mayors can just, so it's jurisdictional of and expands outward of locality. But if Trump declares martial law, he's declaring it on the whole country, not just a city, which technically he cannot do. He's not supposed to be able to do. Whether or not he does it anyway, that's up for discussion, but he is not supposed to be doing any. And when martial law is declared, it means that all reserve. I'm not sure about the reserves. If you know about the reserves, put it in the comments. But the National Guards are automatically federalized to maintain order, curfews. You can be picked up for anything. They can break into your house for anything. The Constitution essentially is null and void, even though legal scholars would argue that's a debate, but they definitely can come into your house. They can come. It's why, and there's a really famous case where Lincoln suspended habeas corpus on its own, or he tried to, and Congress had some shit to say about that. And it's not just the president does it and it's we're all done.
Allison, if you don't mind, if we can go to the memorandum that the White House released, I have it up if you want me to share it, or I send it to you if you want to share it.
If you can share your screen, I don't
Sure.
know if it gives you, does it give you the ability to? I don't know what it looks like on your end.
Share screen.
Awesome.
Hold on, let me make sure I have the right screen about to come up. Can you see that? From
I
the
think
White
I have
House,
to put
President
it.
Donald J. Trump.
There we go.
It's showing up now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is from the White House official website because librarian, we go to the source. A reminder, a memorandum and a executive order is not a law, even though Trump thinks it is. However, what's really important about this is he is a little vague with some stuff. He specifically, and I've highlighted this, he has called for, um, in light of the incidents and credible threats of continued violence, I, by whatever, hereby call into federal service members and units of the National Guard under this law to temporarily protect ICE and other United States government personnel who are performing federal functions, including the enforcement of federal laws, and to protect federal property at locations where protests against these functions are occurring or are likely to occur based on current threat assessments and planned operations. So he is not federalizing just California by what he's stating, or at least he doesn't think he is. He is not specifically saying this is for LA, and he is not giving a specific timeline. I believe they said 90 days. Um, he's being intentionally vague. I would argue, again, not a legal scholar um, or a lawyer, that he is leaving the window open. So if something kicks off in, you know, wherever, he will be able to use the same memorandum to justify his actions. So currently he says, oh, he says it was 60 days or the discretion of the Secretary of Defense, which is terrifying. Um,
Right.
he's. It also says, in addition, the Secretary of Defense may employ other members of regular armed forces to augment. And Hegseth, our dear drunk friend, has already said that he would move the. Oh my goodness, which one is it? I can't remember which arm of the military it is, but he would move I think it's Camp Pendleton, into active duty to assist if necessary. I want to say it was Marines, but I can't swear to that. So I'm going to stop sharing. Stop. Marines, yes. Tom says it's Marines. Good, thank you. Um,
Excuse
so
me.
the executive order is a little, not executive order. It's a memorandum, and the legal standing of that is a little different. I would hope, but I don't have great hope or belief. Congress could step in right now and be like, "No, you're overstepping," but they have yet to do that so far, um, on anything he's done. But like you said with Lincoln, that's what Congress said. Congress said, "No, what do you think you're doing?" I don't think so. If they were to make a declaration, that would be very different. They're the ones that declare war. They're the ones that declare all these things. They're the ones that have that right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. With Lincoln, I think he had pretty much good cause to uh, uh, declare martial law, or no, I'm sorry, suspend habeas corpus. Um, Civil War seems pretty legit to me, but I didn't live the time, so yeah, and there might have been other things. A lot of the Civil War of the 19th century was fought with the intention of keeping the Union together. And I let me rephrase that even still. Lincoln always wanted to keep the Union together, but when he was suspending habeas corpus, um, they thought that it would inflame shit even more. But there, even with the emancipation, Lincoln, with the Emancipation Proclamation, recognizes that you cannot get the Union together. The war cannot be won and without some declaration of saying slavery is over. So, but my point is, if Congress had, um, at the time of times of our history when it would have been understandable to suspend habeas corpus. Now is not even close to any of those times. So, um, you know, when this is all said and done, eventually, I can taste the juiciness of like being free of Trump's voice every day, all day. We have to get back to appreciating humanities in education because too many people don't know the basic law of that holds this shit together. And the Constitution is not a long document. It's not hard to read. And too many people think that it's this unattainable, unreadable document. The people that wrote it were highly educated, sophisticated people who wrote it in a manner for anybody to understand because they were trying to get the people to understand their inalienable rights. So, when this is all said and done, we have to get the humanities back. They're just as important as STEM. Sometimes I think a little bit more because you're not going to have science innovation in this country anymore unless you can get back to our basic humanity and living as a civilized society. Um, I,
Allison, I want to highlight a couple of comments. Wayne says under martial law, he can suspend elections, and that may be one of his plans. And someone else mentioned, where'd it go? Shayla mentioned, I think Trump, Miller, and Holman were all in on this. Shayla, I think you're right. We've talked before. We know that they were looking for a flashpoint that they could exploit, and Allison and I were talking about this before we went live, but in any protest, and then we saw this during Black Lives Matter, and we've seen it previously, you're going to have your genuine protesters. You're going to have some of them that are a little more amped up and a little more willing to push the boundaries. You're going to have bad actors who are looking to co-opt a movement for an opportunity to do whatever they want to do. And you're going to have agent provocateurs who are put there to seed something so that it starts. So we're going to have to be on the lookout for that because it's going to happen. I know during Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, that's right. The the organizers made a very clear point that there would be no violence, and that if they saw violence, they would immediately call those people out and say, "You do not represent us." And that's going to be very important here as well. But we're not going to
Absolutely.
know for decades how many were genuinely protesters who just pushed the boundaries, how many were just bad actors who were using the cover to do what they wanted to do, and how many were put there to try to spark something off. So, our hope, of course, is that people don't spark off and we can avoid a big issue giving them the flashpoint that they want. But human nature says that's unlikely, unfortunately.
I pulled up, I don't know really anything about the Independent, and we were talking about this earlier. I really should look into them. I don't know who owns them. I don't know literally anything, but they do have a live stream. And this is going on in LA right now. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what they're facing. I'm not going to let it go on for too long. Y'all can go to their YouTube channel, and this is live. And this is actually quieter than when I was watching before we started the live stream. Our live stream. Let me get this off. But what I what I was getting at is before we started recording this conversation that Vagabondia and I had, we were, I was talking about how there were several kinds of people because it really wasn't all that loud. Cars were honking, people had bullhorns, but the most audible people that you could hear through the stream were people who were clearly there to show support for the protest. You had people there who were just angry about ICE. You had people there who you questioned why they're there because they were chanting some pretty uh, incendiary comments. And then you had people who were, you know, really there to almost convince the National Guard to join them. So appealing to our shared American humanity of, whether you're born here or not, you're an American. If you're a citizen, it does, like this is one of the only countries in the world that you can become its culture. In Japan, you can't become Japanese. You can live there for your entire life, but you can never become Japanese. And a lot of countries are like that. So, regardless of who those people are in the National Guard standing there, they have some sliver, and it might be bigger and bigger or smaller in depending on who it's there. But we all have some common shared American humanity. And I'm going to give those National Guard the benefit of the doubt, and I hope I don't regret saying this. I don't think they want to be there. I don't think they want to be pointing guns at their fellow Americans. This isn't an unlawful order that they can refuse at this moment in time. But with that said, they there will come a time where they have to choose. And I don't think throwing insults at them is really the best way to go about things. So that's why I say there are people there who are clearly trying to either incite the protesters or the National Guard or both. And I think we have to police each other. I saw yesterday, and I wish I had saved the clip of this person starting to break shit outside the ICE federal building of where it really started when it really started getting rowdy, and somebody stopped him. It was like, and you could see him like you couldn't see what he was saying, but his body language was very indicative of him saying, "Quit it, dude." So we have to police ourselves. I don't think that there will be. With that said, I don't know how we get out of this, but I know we have to be careful. And I don't think we get out of this unscathed. And I think it's probably, if we're really
Unfortunately, I think
honest
you're
with
correct.
ourselves, if we're really being in our honest place, it's we haven't been able to get out of this unscathed in a really long time. It's been, and
Well, and you
I
and
I
I
don't have
talked
any,
about we didn't get here in one instant and under one man. This has been coming for a long time with not addressing erosions of democracy, not addressing a lot of those issues. There's some great conversation in the chat about Stephen Miller, our favorite ghoul, and
hey,
um,
ghoul. Yeah, that's exactly what he is, a
that's
ghoul,
exactly
a
what he is, right?
goon.
He's a ghoul. And of course, Holman, who is just that man is inhuman. There's just no way around it. He's just pure evil. And the puppy killer gnome,
Awful.
um, they are gearing for this. They want this. They want that flashpoint. They want the violence, and they're just completely fueled by hate. I don't personally believe that they necessarily are Trump supporters so much as they see him as an avenue to do the bad things they want to do. And I
Hmm.
think he's a useful idiot for them. Sometimes a hard to
Yeah.
control idiot, but he will let them do what they want to do. He will let them have their bad intentions and provoke it, and they'll just support that. And
Hmm.
they scare me. Like Stephen Miller terrifies me. Peter, don't even get me started on Peter Thiel and some of those others. They are terrifying people who just have
Hmm.
really a lot of hate in their souls, and I don't know what to do about that. But they're
Yeah,
holding him
there
up,
is,
and as long as he's supporting the bad things they want to do, they're going to have his back, and that sucks.
yeah, when, like, and, librarians, I feel like in general are very forward thinking of like what we have to do, and, after this, so we can plan it now. Um, we're gonna have to, something's got to give, and because this does not go away without serious reform, this does not go away until we put people in office who will create serious change. And I saw this. God, I really hate. Maybe I just need to be better prepared for our live streams. But there's this economist who is a professor at uh, University of Massachusetts Amherst. So one of those liberal bastions of socialism, but he's been saying this stuff for like decades, really. And he was laughed at by most of the academic community in a respect. Not that he's crazy, but like he was basically saying we are sowing the seeds for a second civil war. And he's been saying this probably since Obama was elected. But he gets dismissed, and we still saw more progress. We saw Obergefell decision get rendered, and we think, oh, we're past all the bullshit, hate, and and he has been saying we are going to see a backlash of trying to take this country back to the Stone Age. And but anyway, so I bring him up in respect. No, it's not David Brooks. But
Shayla said, "Is it Scott Galloway?"
no, not him. But I do like his content. Scott Galloway, I think, is a professor at one of the California colleges. I know he's a graduate of Chicago University. Let me see if I can. And I don't even subscribe to his stuff really. It like just comes up as part of my algorithm. Um, but a lot of people take his transcripts from interviews he's done in the past or lectures he's given at Amherst, and uh, they have put it over like an AI scene talking about the fall of America. Um, I think his last name is Brooks. But anyway, he's been really showing. There's this one video in particular where he talks about moments in American history where society, coupled with the government, had to look at, do we reform the system or do we break it and build something different? So, and he uses two examples. He uses for reform, he used uh, the fat cat billionaires of the time, which I think at that point they were just like 100 millionaires, was the equivalent of our billionaire today, and um, and it caused severe economic, incongruities. People, the elderly were on the streets most of the time because, you're old and you can't work. Um, and they essentially cause their greed and, Republican, uh, terrible Republican economic policy fuels the Great Depression. So they had to look at it and say, do we reform it or do we break it and do something else? Now, at the same time, in Europe, Russia, China, they are all breaking their systems and trying something else. So you have like different socialists to communist revolutions happening all over the world. And that scared people. So they were like, all right, let's reform it. So then you get, the New Deal, you get programs like the public works projects, infrastructure projects, you get um, Social Security. We get these great safety net ideas built into the system while still having a capitalist mentality. The example he gives for breaking the system was the Civil War and the end of slavery. Now, leading up to the Civil War, very few people talked about breaking the system and ending it completely. They thought it should be a slow reform of phasing out slavery. And when it came down to war, even then they tried to reform the system instead of breaking it and ending slavery. Lincoln, for most of his political career, was about reforming. But then it just hits a point in where the North is demoralized, they're about to lose the war, and Lincoln says, you know what? We got to break it. And that's when you see the change in his rhetoric and the Emancipation Proclamation comes. Because ultimately, you cannot project yourself as a moral country and have human beings as slaves. Like you can't, those two, like very few things in this world most things in this world can be true at the same time. But when you're talking about more morality and slavery, those two cannot coexist because, slavery in any form, it, it's, you're owning a human being. Like, there's nothing moral about slavery in any capacity. So that's the example he gives as a system having to be broken and rebuilt. And it was rebuilt terribly because we are still here today fighting these same racist bigots about just they tweak the argument so it may not be directly about slavery, but it stems from a poor restructuring after slavery. And Lincoln getting assassinated, I think, was probably the worst thing that could have happened. But that's a question, that's a thought experiment we can never obviously prove, and a lot of historians hate to speculate on those things because they're not imperial questions that you can back up with evidence on what would have happened. But it is a good thought experiment. And I'm sorry I'm rambling, but that the whole point is I don't think we can reform this shit show of the American government. We have to break it. And I don't mean violently. Let's get this clear. By breaking it and I mean like Citizens United, that's a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. Terrible. I mean, I think that Obama coupled with Citizens United being up or I don't was it new precedent or overturned precedent? I don't know, but we need to break a few of the things that, because it's not working, and it will not work, and we will perpetually cycle through Trump if we do not stop this and do something different. And that's all I gotta say on that.
That's right, Shayla. Abolish Citizens United. We've got to get big money and corporate influence out of politics because they are supposed to represent us, and it's very hard for them to hear us when there's a whole bunch of money telling them otherwise. I mean, the decisions that they're so out of touch with the common person anyway. But you add all that money and influence, and we just have no shot of what we need being heard. Which, by the way, I was going to ask you, what did you think of Elon Musk saying that there needs to be a third party created that represents the other 80%, like he's part of everyday Americans?
Yeah. First of all, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. But he's what he thinks he's gonna lead it? Because I promise you, like no one is following that asshole. Here's the thing with the third party option. And you're starting to see a little bit of something what could be a successful new option. And like, I really wish these consultants would go the fuck away and these politicians would listen to everyday people, particularly librarians. A, because we're educated and know what's going on, but B, we're not so educated we know we're not infallible. Or you get what I'm saying? Anyway, I think everybody should listen to a librarian, but I digress. And I found the guy who I was talking about. His name is Richard Wolff, the professor at Amherst. Um, some call him a socialist, and he probably technically, I mean, I don't think he is a socialist. I think he just advocates for more social democratic views than purely capitalistic. Um, but like, I wish these consultants would go away and they would start talking to real people because a third party needs to happen, and they need to be funded and fueled so that it dilutes MAGA and creates a new second party, starting out as a third party. Our system really doesn't work with third parties, and I'm not really a big proponent of multi parties. That's a whole other episode, but just hear me out on this. Third parties typically need to start at the grassroots level and then work their way up into the federal level. Now, why is that? Because let's say by some miracle we're able to elect an independent as the president, and he has agenda items, and the Congress are Republicans and Democrats. How does he get his shit through? Who are his allies? Whereas if you start at the grassroots and work your way up, then an independent, uh, uh, I don't know, a libertarian or the Green Party or whoever the existing non-viable third parties are now, then you have allies to help you. And this is why the few independents that are in Congress, they caucus with somebody else. They caucus with one of the big parties because they're not on their own. They can't really accomplish things because they don't
Yeah,
have,
whether we like it or not, they have to build
yeah,
coalitions. There's no way around it.
yeah, you have no coalition. So starting at the grassroots level, and this has been shown time and time again in other countries, significant parties that have built momentum in the US started at the grassroots. But I mean, look at Moms for Liberty. If they hadn't been like stopped in their tracks, which they're not, it's not over with them, but they are significantly diminished because they started local with school boards and state offices and got themselves elected, and it was real quiet because nobody was paying attention to those tiny offices. That's where real effective third party rises happen, but that takes years. So where can you get I'm a woman of a certain age who remembers, and I'm a dork, so a lot of people my age, our age, may not remember this. But I didn't have cable, so I watched the Ross Perot, George Bush. Was it George Bush?
Yes.
George Bush and Bill Clinton. I watched that debate, and he was probably one of the most successful third party candidates in a presidential election. And I think he would have, but he was pulling from the Republican end. And where he went wrong was he tried to drop out of the race, which I think if he had stood in, he stood a chance. I really believe he did. Looking back on it, as a kid, I'm just like, watching it because I don't have cable and that's my best option. But like, um, but even he didn't have the momentum that is required to overcome the media bias of that time in 1992. Now, to overcome the media bias of 2026 and 8, and that's a monumental challenge. So here's what I was thinking. Fuel a center right, it probably would be filled with center right people. Rebuild the Republican Party. You got to call it something different. Republicans are done. Like that name is done. You got to find an easy, catchy name to call yourselves. Not no labels. That party was stupid. Like you have to come up with something catchy that's appealing to the center-ish. Because a lot of people who vote, I would say even most people who voted for Trump are the center who's frustrated with government. You got to appeal to a broad coalition. And that's why I say you got to appeal. This party would have to have a big tent mentality similar to the Democrats. But what you're trying to do is siphon the old Republicans who will only vote Republican and slowly dilute out, filter out the MAGA. How you do this, I don't know. I'm not like, I know about communications in, history and effectiveness and what does what, where, but I don't know how you get people to join you. That is out of my league. But it's really one of the only way, and you're starting to see Republicans or former Republicans move to becoming Democrats. But a lot of Republicans don't want to be Democrats. They don't even want to be independents. So you need to form something where those people, like what's his name? Ken Paxton is primarying him. He's the senator for Texas that isn't Ted Cruz. He's being primaried by Ken Paxton, and he will likely be primaried out. He should either become a Democrat or an independent, where people would likely vote for him, because we could either have that asshole or Ken Paxton as the next senator from Texas. We have to stop with the political like purity tests too, and get behind the people who are, when we can't elect a Democrat in there, we have to elect the Republican who will do the least amount of harm. So I think Lisa Murkowski should become a Democrat or form something that people like her can join that would filter out MAGA. Um,
So, two things. Being from Texas during the Ross Perot thing, don't forget Ross Perot was a what would have been a billionaire at that point. So he wasn't
mhm.
grassroots. He self funded. Um,
Oh no, he no on a presidential level, it's
no, no, no.
never
Yeah, but
grassroots.
that's a factor. That's a huge factor. The other thing I think is interesting is we've been seeing this for a while with the MAGA movement. Both major parties are fracturing, and there's a reorganization coming. Um, and you see it by the extremism that's happening. And earlier, I believe it was Shayla asked what we thought about the Democratic leadership and their lack of leadership. Um, that's what we think. It's a lack of leadership. I don't. I'm so tired of hearing Jeffries say, "When we're in the majority again, then we can do something." No, you still have the power to obstruct. You still have the power to filibuster. You still have the power to propose legislation, propose investigations, everything else. You don't just sit while the other party's in power and let them do whatever they want. That's not how this works. I don't
Mm-mm.
understand, like, in the wake of the situation in LA right now, the ICE raids and everything else, why we're not seeing the elected Democrats showing up and speaking out and helping organize and giving the message. I don't know what the fuck they're thinking. And I'm assuming this is part of that whole corporate Democrat thing of we think we have to play nice because that's our brand, but we never get anything accomplished as a result. But I think both parties
Yep.
are going to fracture significantly, in part because of the pressure from the Trump situation, but also because neither of them anymore has a cohesive message. There's too many conflicting battles there. We're seeing right now a whole lot of people switch parties, seemingly
Hmm.
out of the blue. Did you see that Jean Pierre, that used to be the White House spokesperson, she just flipped from Dem to Independent? And then there was a Republican that flipped to Dem, and like there's a whole bunch of it's going on. That is a sure sign, if you can flip that easily, that the party does not have a message, right? Like there's no cohesion there if you can that easily flip, particularly from a Republican to a Democrat. Like that's a big flip. We didn't even see Cheney or Kinzinger flip to independent or to Dem after all that they've been put through. They're still calling themselves Republicans. But I think
Because they have a
what you're
wet
catching on,
dream of
right? But I
thinking
think
that
what you're
it's going to
catching on
change.
is they don't have anywhere to go because there's not a winnable party that does encompass where they stand. Um, if we survive this, and I'm sorry that sounds so bleak, I think what will come out of that, what will come out of all of this ultimately is a restructuring of what we consider the two major parties to be and what they actually represent. And the Dems are doing themselves zero favors by remaining silent, by playing culture wars, by saying, well, we're not in the majority. They are they're focused on 2026 with the hope that 2026 is going to occur. We're not living in that timeline right now. We have no guarantee right now with the way the accelerated pace that things are going down with Project 2025, with the ICE raids, with all of these people, to expect a guaranteed election in 2026, much less 2028. And that
Chris
is
Murphy,
horrifying.
Chris Murphy, who I think is the true Democratic leader in the Senate, because he's been saying we're acting like there's a guarantee of a 2026 election, and he's the only one being really honest. I think he should do something bold and like right now, like all the establishment Democrats are following James Carville's plan of play dead,
Hmm.
and that's stupid. That is
Yep.
fucking the dumbest thing that we could be doing right now. Be
Well,
playing
you
dead.
know me. I am a very very liberal progressive person, but right now I have seen very few Democrats say or do anything that makes me want to vote for them. And that's sad. They have
Yeah,
so much ammunition that they could be attaching to and making statements about and throwing up roadblocks and coming out for, and they're not doing it. And that does not suggest to me that you're going to be the solution to this problem.
yeah.
And I
Now,
want to
don't get
vote
me
for you,
wrong.
you know?
Yeah, like don't get me wrong. Like I hate this. Like we cannot not vote because we have to at this point go from who's gonna like we have to switch from who's gonna do the least amount of harm and
Hmm.
advocate because that's where we are. We just have to recognize our reality. It would be nice if this we could vote for people who are inspirational and are fighters and but right now we do not have it. Or maybe in your state, if you don't have that, you have to look at it and you have to vote even if you hate the candidates because if you don't, the even bigger asshole is going to be put in power while we are
Well,
still in this
that's how we
system.
got here. That's how we got here. A third of Americans were eligible to vote and did not even show up. Never mind the rumors and perhaps evidence of there being vote tampering or fraud or whatever else. There is a huge number of people who just did not show up. I'm a firm believer that the Republicans have been playing a long game for a long time with gerrymandering, with misinformation, and with voter disenfranchisement to tell people your vote doesn't matter. They've planted that seed, and a lot of people believe it. And so they no longer even try to participate. They just say, well, the system's rigged and it doesn't matter. And the result is a self fulfilling prophecy. That's how we end up with people winning with no majority, no mandate, and saying, I've got the mandate. No, you don't. You just kept people from showing up.
Yeah,
And that's not the same
absolutely.
thing.
Yeah, and but on like who was it? David Hogg. He was. I don't know if he was ousted yet. I heard they were trying to the DNC, but he was
Mm-hmm.
challenging, and I think he went about it wrong. Obviously, he went about it wrong. Okay, here's the thing. If you are 80 something years old and you are a fighter and you are going out there to advocate for the people, stay in Congress. If you are Bernie Sanders, you should not be running for re-election. Why? Because life is at its end for you. I don't mean to be mean, but it's some people don't live to see his age. You have to be prepping the next generation.
I think the last 8 elected officials that died in office were Democrats. Like, you
Yes,
have to, mortality is a thing, folks. We don't have a choice.
yes. And so the RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she should have resigned. Come on, man.
Could
Like,
have filled her
come
spot.
the,
Yep.
like, you should never, and I get it, but like, you know, we are dealing with some horrible laws now because people could not bow out. Jerry Connolly was pushing to be, um, the AOC ran for it. What committee is that? The most important. It's like the accountability, congressional accountability, um,
Did oversight?
oversight. Thank you. um, he demanded that he be put as chair when he had cancer, knowingly had cancer at 70 something years old. Like we have to like say something to these
Yep.
people. Like, we need you to fight for, and I don't give a fuck if it's your time. If you do not have the fight in you, you're not put in Congress to be a spectator. You're put in Congress to do something. And the fact that he passed away 6 months later, after pushing to be elected to oversight, after demanding he be the leader, after we have we were one vote shy of the that big awful bill passing. I
Yep.
mean, I'm not trying to dog on the guy, but have some respect for the American people. You're not there for your ego. You're not there to be a spectator. You're there to be representatives of us, not aligning your agenda with some asshole consultant who's telling you to play dead, and then literally you do play dead because you are dead. Like, we gotta stop, and we gotta stop electing these people. Like, we
Well,
have
and
to.
that's what happened. Like, Houston's representative died in office several months ago, and because the state law allows Paxton to wait to hold the special election, they don't even have a rep, which means the minority we already had, it was a slim minority. It's made worse because that seat's not filled. And
Yeah.
so it allowed a vote like that to be way closer than it should have been. And I think it's hilarious, by the way, I wanted to ask you about this, that there have been multiple Republicans now, including Large Marge, coming out saying, I didn't read it, and if I'd read that part, I would have voted no. Girl, that was literally your job. I'm sorry that it was 1,100 pages. That, first of all,
There's
is
literally
unacceptable. Yeah, but second, that was your job. You and your staffers were supposed to comb through that thing. So later, when the press pointed out, yo, you voted for this, you could have said, yes, but here's why. Or I didn't like that part, but all of this made up for it. But there's no reason why a month later you should have come out and said, I didn't know that was in there. And if I had, I would have voted no. Are you kidding
Okay,
me?
a really great tool of AI is that you can upload huge documents and it will summarize things. And you can ask it questions saying, I don't like anything taking away from states' rights. What in this bill would take away from states' rights? Or, if that's because that's what she said was her concern was that it takes away from
Yeah,
states'
about the
rights.
AI thing. Hmm.
So, like, and it would find it for you. So, I think, and her staff, which I'm convinced that it must take an act of God each session to get people to work for her, because I don't see who would actually want to work for her. But you know what? It's a big country. I'm sure she finds somebody. But yeah, like, you know, how you admit you didn't read it is
Yeah.
even
And she's not
wilder.
the only one who has come out and said, I didn't read that part. And it's been different parts that they claim they didn't read, but still, like, there's no excuse for that. There's no way I would tell my boss in my measly little job, oh, yeah, I voted on
Sorry,
that
didn't
thing, but
read
I
that
didn't
part.
bother to read. Hmm.
Like that is wild. I and so what my point, what I was getting to was, if you're old and you're in the middle of your term and you got the fight in you and you are fighting, I won't tell you not to run, but I want you to take a really, really, like, look at in yourself and ask you, are you up for this moment in time for your constituents? Because if you're not willing to get arrested, or you could, and you'll fight for your people anyway, if you do not have the fight in you to do bold moves, then you do not need to be running for re-election. I'm sorry. Like,
Well, and I,
it
I,
has
I don't know
nothing.
if this comes from being a librarian or working retail, but we always talked about continuation planning. You're always thinking about who's going to replace you because that can happen at any time. Because unfortunately, even if you're young, you can get hit by a bus or have a terminal diagnosis or whatever. Things happen, right? You're always thinking about building the next generation of leaders. And that's something the Dems have been terrible at. They have doubled down on the same people over and over and over and over again, and then wondered why there were no new young leaders emerging. It's like you're supposed to help them emerge. You're supposed to, support them. And I think
Mentor them.
that's what David Hogg was advocating for, was building that new generation of leaders. And I agree, he did it in a very abrasive way that was very off-putting, but there's an there's a need for that. Like, you have to groom new people. You need to help them ascend the ladder. You don't yank the ladder up behind you. And we wonder why the only people running are, people that are on their 13th term or something. Um, Amethyst made the point earlier, when they created lifetime appointments, a lifetime was like 40 years. Now we're looking at people living well into their 80s or further and holding a position, and there's nothing. Wasn't there was someone that was like, she was almost literally in a nursing home while she was serving in the
Diane
Senate?
Feinstein. Oh
Exactly.
no, wait.
Like, how is that
No,
acceptable?
I know who you're talking about. She was the one you're talking about. I forgot where she was, but yeah, she was in a home for dementia, and her staff
Yeah.
was like
And
essentially
I
covering
get
her.
that her constituents voted for her. I get that, and that is their right. But come on. Like, if I don't show up to my job a certain number of days of the year, I'm fired. If you don't show up for the vote a certain, or committee hearings a certain number of times, you don't get to keep holding them. That's not
And you
right.
got
You're
to
not
pressure
doing
these
your job.
people, like, who are sick, who are physically sick, and their staff that enables them. I wanted to address lifetime appointments too, because this is because we've let money into politics. So they allowed lifetime appointments in 17 whatever because they did not want justices to be influenced by being elected and making their decisions based on, um, political party and fear of
How's
not
that
getting
working out for
elected.
us?
And so, but there's another component to it where money, they did not anticipate the amount of money and corruption that could stem into the Supreme Court via, look at Clarence Thomas. Now, people would eventually retire from the Supreme Court in their 60s or even 70s because they wanted to go make millions in the private sector. But now they don't have to retire in the private sector because, as we've seen, billionaires will keep the justices they want happy to keep their votes the way they want them. So so that lack of transparency between Supreme Court justices and their friends on the outside, it now has to, I don't know how you make them accountable because they're not filling out transparency forms. That's another thing that needs to get broken and fixed. Like, the Supreme Court is full of corruption. That's just, so how do we fix this? I'm an advocate for 20-year terms. One 20-year term, that's it. Um, but also the lifetime in 17 whatever, also not very many people lived into their 70s, 80s, 90s, like some of these old fucks were, you know.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about the Supreme Court thing. What did you think about Trump yelling at Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society for not giving him loyal enough judges?
I think I think
I
he
giggled a
said
little more than I should have, probably.
I think he let it out of the bag. I'm surprised that watch that tweet and see if it's deleted, and somebody make sure they get a screenshot of it, or make sure it's on the Wayback Machine. So like when if he does delete it, the web link is still there, because um, it was kind of shocking that more people didn't pick up on it. I think that if you're on the fence about whether or not Trump is the right man for the job, I don't see how you think he's the right. Like, if you're all concerned about corruption and morale, like, my dude just admitted that he asked the Federalist, or is it the Federalist Society, right? Is his thing?
Yes, the Federalist Society.
Which I have a side comment on that, the irony of that, but I mean, you can't. Like, how do more Americans not see that he basically just said, I elect anybody the Federalist Society tells me to because I want them to be loyal. Like,
Well, and I don't think he realizes how dangerous it is to call out Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society. They have an incredible amount of shadow power, incredible amount. Leonard Leo's another one of those that gives me the creeps. Like, he's
mm,
living full of
yeah.
hate, man, fueled by hate. And to call him out, yeah, you may have cut a bridge that you can't afford to lose, buddy.
Um, yeah. One thing I find hilarious about the Federalist Society. Now, if you go to their webpage, we'll have a whole dissertation about, federalism and, like why they're called the Federalist Society and how it ties back into our history. The Federalists, no matter what anybody will tell you, were the Alexander Hamiltons of the Revolution. They believed in strong federal, meaning central government. The Jeffersons, the anti-federalists, the Jeffersons of the world, and I think Madison was one. They believed in more states' rights. So for the Federalists to claim all about states' rights, but then advocate for like authoritarian rule topics with like highly conservative, is just wild to me. Like how you can call yourself the Federalist Society but advocate on in bad faith on your states' rights beliefs and anti-big government mentality. Like, I mean, the Federalists of the 1700s essentially made our modern economic system and, um, wiped away all state debt to get the economic machine roaring after the revolution. That was a big problem. Um, there was no central currency. There was no central economic system. Every state was doing its own thing and it wasn't working. So that's why Alexander Hamilton said, wipe out every state's debts. Let's just start out new. Damn be the consequences because we're never going to get out of, if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll be like 13 flailing little countries that can't do anything because our economies all suck. So it's just wild to me how anybody can like really base their conservative um, think tank on like principles from the revolution, the Federalist principles of the revolution, because they're pretty woke. If you really go break down what Alexander Hamilton did, um, it's pretty woke to today's standards. Just saying. Oh,
Well, and Cynthia pointed out it's never been about states' rights. It's never been about small government. That's
of course
smokescreen they
not.
use when it's convenient. I mean, if it's about states' rights, then the Republicans wouldn't have put into their budget bill an AI moratorium on states making rules about AI for 10 years. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
And they certainly would not be okay with a federal organization collating all citizen information into one master database if they truly believed in small government and states' rights. It's a convenient argument when it suits their needs, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe originally they started out, just on the conservative side of federalism, but you know, I think you should change your name, dudes. Like, Federalist isn't, and I wish more Americans would pick up on some of this shit and like not treat American history like it's some afterthought and because, you know, people like to run their mouths about things, not even. I listen to this one. I don't watch this podcaster really at all. He's a little too, um, I don't want to say young. He's probably 19. Um, but I do catch some of his stuff because he has some really hilarious arguments with MAGA. And he lost his shit when somebody from MAGA said the Constitution is meant to be unchangeable. And it's just like, then why do we have amendments to amend or change what was originally written? Like, really? This is where we are right now? Like how like we need to address education or we're never gonna have a roaring democratic um principled country. Like that's the whole point of it. It was not meant to be easily changed on the whims of corrupt politicians that they knew we would encounter. But it's definitely, they knew that the ideals they lived in 1789 were not going to be the same ideals that we would live in 2025. They knew this. They were forward thinking in that regard because they wanted this to last and they looked to the future of what future generations could it could um, could encounter. I think one thing they totally never thought was possible, and I never thought was possible, was getting two branches to go along with each other. Because with the Constitution, when you really look at it at its core, the Constitution, as brilliant as it relies on the faith of people acting in good faith, and it relies on citizens being relatively informed. Something that they also relies on that I had never really thought of um, till now in a conscious thought stream. was it relies on politicians maintaining their own self-interest. And what do I mean by that? I mean that like it's designed so that when you have Republicans who do not like what's going on within their party, stand up and say this is messed up, like we're gonna sink the country with this idea. Um, you have the party itself pressuring them to go along with it, or like you don't have other people because they're scared of the executive. You don't have that fight that uh, the founders thought would always be there for people to maintain their power within each branch of government. Because Congress, if they really would like realize how much power they have to stop Trump, they either do not want to or they're afraid to and have surrendered that power. But we didn't have to get to this point. Congress at any time had the power to stop this, and they chose not to. So we're kind of also when we're looking at the Constitution, how you prevent two branches from collaborating, it's designed when one branch steps out of line. It's not designed to withstand two or all of them. So I don't know how we figure that out. I'm I think so many people, citizens are brainwashed into thinking what's possible, what's impossible, or who's really to blame for their poor life choices. I don't know how we fix that, but I
I think the
know
problem at this point is all three branches. They've all, I don't understand why Congress has so willingly given up their power. They have had the power to stop and prevent so much of this, and they haven't done it. But the judiciary has done that as well. And more and more and more power has been consolidated under the executive branch. And that is exactly what the founding fathers feared and were trying to combat. But
I
until
don't
they
think the
push back,
judiciary is gone. It's not gone
I don't think
because
it's
lots of
gone,
the
but I think that they ceded a lot of power, particularly when they gave him presidential immunity on so many things. There's a
oh
couple of
well, the
cases that can
Supreme
hurt us
Court,
there.
yeah, that's a tough
Yeah.
one. I'm talking about as a whole, like
Yeah.
because the judiciary is also includes state and federal judges. Um, because those are a big part of the Supreme Court can't hear every case. So they're choosing to which case they choose which cases they hear. So are they compromised? Yes. But are like there are some there are definitely a couple of those conservative fascists that are like, okay, I'm only willing to go so far. So I don't think it's completely lost, uh, but the judiciary is definitely the only thing propping this shit up from going to utter awfulness. And
But it's ridiculous that it should come to that because, like you said, it should be Congress also actively pushing back and the Supreme Court affirming what they're saying that no, that's not the executive branch's right, is Congress's right. And Congress is not stepping up and saying that the way they should.
because I think if they are not, they want. Like, I think we also have to come to terms with Americans want authoritarian rule, which is a I don't think they understand what that means, but I think a lot of the diehard MAGAs want authoritarian fascism. I don't think they understand what that means in their lives. I think Congress wants to cede its power, like actively is giving the reins to Trump because that's what they want. And I don't think they understand that that means look at what happened when Saddam Hussein became president. Even the people that supported him, he called the list of names and they were all executed. And those were people that supported him. They weren't all opposition leaders or even leaders. They were just part of, I guess they had a parliament at that moment. So, um, I think, I don't like to use the touch the hot stove anymore analogy. Um, and that's a long reason why, but I think we have to not let, I think the people that you can't reason with have to let things get terrible before they understand what's actually going on. Like what they voted
Well, and there's a
for, I
lot of
guess,
people that
essentially.
until it impacts them personally, they don't see it as a problem. And that's a problem because it shouldn't have to impact you personally for you to see that it's wrong.
And the 1950s wasn't all that great. Like our tax rates, the reason why we were able to have prosperity is because like the middle class was uplifted, and that's because taxes were higher on the obscenely wealthy. Like, you know, people who say they want to go back to the 1950s are really just want to be able to subjugate, women again, put them in the kitchen, get them out of the workforce. But, you know, just like transitioning to Gilead for the US, a lot of people have to die and starve to make that system possible. And I don't think people know who really feel like we need to go back to those times understand that. And or they have enough money that they don't care what happens to the every ordinary people. And I don't know how we fix this. I think we identify what's wrong and how it needs to be changed, but or what needs to be changed, but how to change it, I have no fucking clue anymore how this gets better for us. I hate to leave, I know we're way over time, but like, we're headed for some dark times, and I think not necessarily people watching this, but we, the American people, need to wait. I kind of um, have to have a come to Jesus talk with my sister because she's acting, and she's pretty well informed. Don't get me wrong. She's very intelligent, very smart, very smart. But, and, I wouldn't say she's informed like me, but she's informed way more than the average American, definitely. And she's trying to make plans like everything's going to be just fine and dandy. And I'm trying to be supportive, but at the same time, are you sure you really want to be planning for that? Like, are you sure? Because we're spending money on something that, eh, because this ain't this is gonna get demonstrably worse for all of us, and
And that's what we've got to prepare for. We've got to hope for the best, but we've got to prepare for the worst.
that's what I'm doing. Um, I I don't know what the answers are. I don't think anybody does, but I do know like listening to James Carville, which I started talking about this, but then I got distracted. James Carville, he has not won an election for anybody since 1992, which I'm not good at mathing, but was that 30 years ago? 32 years ago-ish? 33 years ago? Okay, a lot's changed since 1992. I was 11 in 1992. So the advice he gives to Democrats too, since he started resurfacing in like 2020, I think he started coming back in the commentator scene. The advice he's been giving, he's always wrong. So why are Democrats now listening to him is beyond me. And I don't think we should be working to kick out the old people, but I definitely think that anybody who's a little bit on the older side in Congress who does not have the fight in them or like they really have to ask themselves, are they serving their constituents? And will they more likely be alive in 2 to 5 years? And by that, I mean, if you were 75, 80 years old, sure, it's very possible you could be alive in 2 to 5 years. You could be alive. My grandmother lived till 99, but the likelihood of it, like if you're going through cancer treatments at age 80, you got to give it up. Like you got to train the next generation to take over. Um, and it's not ageism, it's reality. We all need to look at what the reality is of this situation, not what we want reality to be. I mean, actual fucking reality. And the reality is that if you are 80 years old with an aggressive cancer, you do not need to be president. Sorry, Joe Biden. I'm very sorry to hear about his diagnosis, but you can't be president. You don't have any business trying to run to be president. If you're 80 and you have some sort of degenerative disease that is going to impair you from being able to serve your constituents because your constituents need you to be there to vote for them, whatever that vote is. And, I don't know how we fix this. I don't know how we can, I don't know how we need an FDR. We need a Lincoln, and not just for their accomplishments. We need them for their leadership and how they always knew what to do at like insanely complicated times. And we have Hoover, and we have I don't know who the other um, who was the guy before Lincoln that did a really shitty job. I'm a history dork, but I don't remember. But like we it's really tragic that we need an FDR in this moment, and we have what we have, and
We have a Nixon, only he doesn't think it's a
yeah.
problem to be a crook. All right, plug the socials and all that stuff.
Okay, so we have merch now. We have bookmarks, we have stickers, so I'm gonna show you some stuffs. Let me get this up here. So we have, oops, let me get this up here. Do. So the socials, head to our link tree. Links are in the description. We now have a merch store that if I could, my internet's kind of spacing out. Next weekend is the No Kings Indivisible rallies all over the country. Link here to find where your closest one is. They're happening in all the major cities. Some states are having like 20 different protests going on in different parts of the state. I promise you, there is a indivisible rally next week, which is June 14th, is Trump's birthday. Trump, which we didn't get to today, sent a mass line of rail cars from Texas with tanks and batteries and all sorts of stuff. It is a really haunting image. Look it up on YouTube. But he is having his birthday Kim Jong-un style army parade with tanks marching in in front of the White House in DC. So go protest in your locality, wherever that might be. Next, we have a merch store, and I'm going to show you some of the items we have. We have some bumper stickers. We have bookmarks with the First Amendment. They are aluminum and they are very, very nice. We have stickers. ISIS tear gas smells like fascism. Get yours on our store. You can get it on our link tree. And if you just want fine print branded merchandise, we have bookmarks. We have a sticker. This is just what we're starting out with. If you have other ideas or want a different color. I just picked what I thought might be the most popular, but I'm usually wrong on those kinds of things. So, um, but make sure you get your ISIS tear gas smells like fascism sticker because it does, and it is. Let me get back to their link tree. We have the Project 2025 tracker. It's really haunting, and you can show it. It shows you how far along in the different areas of government Project 2025 has really integrated in. Contacting your representatives. I have not put Tony's link, and I should, for contacting your representatives. Get your pocket constitution on Tony's on the Tony Michael podcast. He has a delightful little digital file that you can download to have your own pocket constitution. We must remain nonviolent, so check out our nonviolent engagement. It is more effective and it only takes 3.5% of the population to collapse authoritarian regimes. So check that out also on our link tree. We have our Substacks. Um, the Library of Democracies, and Marie Rivington's Substack. She is the editor of the Kaufman Chronicle. Delightful. She posts very delightful um, morsels of what's going on and why we should care about them. And then there's different ways you can support us, become paid members on Substack, buy us a coffee, check out our bookstore on bookstore.org. Don't support Jeff Bezos in his Amazon. Amazon's really awful to authors too. So bookshop.org, you can support independent bookstores, and anything you buy go with our link goes to we get like a tiny commission from it. And as always, check out the Tony Michaels podcast Monday through Friday, 12 p.m. to 2 noon. I'm sorry, 12 p.m. to 2 Eastern time, and this is his link tree to get your pocket constitution. Am I forgetting anything? Or
Nope, but of course, support your local library.
and support your local libraries, of course. Tell your librarians you appreciate them because they need some love right now. It's a sad time for libraries. Um, I think that's it for all the socials. Follow us, share this, and thanks for tuning in and putting up with. Sorry we were gone for a couple weeks. I got really sick, so I had to take last week off, um, and then with the
Well, and I did
holidays.
want to
So
highlight what Shayla said. Do not go to DC on the 14th to protest the parade. It will look like he has more people there than we want him to get any credit for, and also
that's
it
a good
is
point.
definitely a recipe for bad stuff.
Don't
There will be
stand
no
in
peace
front of the
protests
tanks.
everywhere. Go to those. Yeah.
Don't stand in front of the tanks. I know there's going to be some asshole who wants to recreate that Tiananmen Square image. Don't do that. I mean, they're not going to run you over, but don't give them fuel. Like go to the indivisible rallies that are happening. If you're going to be in DC or want to go to DC, don't go to the parade. Protest where the indivisible people are. There's tons of information on their website. We have a link to their website if you want to know more about the DC protest in particular. But yeah, that's a really good point to not go to. Oh yeah, I'm feeling a lot better. I caught the crud and it knocked me out. Summer colds are the worst. So um, but yeah, definitely go to your local Indivisible rally. Um, I really think it's going to blow the world away. Americans aren't sleeping. And I have also just one quick comment about Americans sleeping at rallies. Not literally. You know, Americans are typically slow to, are usually not the first to the party to overthrow a government, contrary to our beginning. A lot of countries criticized us, rightfully so, for allowing Trump to be reelected and then just kind of watching and waiting. But I don't think it's fair anymore because millions of people are working really hard to stop this. And I think it's really going to show the world that we've never been asleep. we might just be slower to catch the attention. And also keep in mind, our media is under Trump's thumb now. I don't give a fuck which network it is. They are under his thumb and they underreport numbers. They don't show what's actually happening. Um, and you got to go not to legacy media. And people in the United States, you need to look at international news if you really want to see the actual numbers of crowds, because the world is watching, because journalists are here, documenting this. So if you want to see more accurate reporting of the protests, look at the rest of the world, not legacy, or go to independent news journalists who are there recording it at the scene. Um, I quit mainstream media a long time ago. Um, so yeah, be safe if you're out there, and we will talk about everything. Um, Next week will be June 15th, so we'll have to see. But yeah, don't be
Thanks,
stupid.
everybody. Peace out.
Thanks. Bye everyone.